ushered in a supper into my stall. You are blocking my wealthy customers with your poverty. Carry your bad luck and get out of here. Ziki, are you not utterly ashamed of yourself, Maka? How can you treat a helpless elder with such sheer wickedness and cruelty?
Thank you. Bless you, my child.
Mama Nneka resided on the extreme outskirts of the town in a claustrophobic, dilapidated hut roofed with rusted, perforated zinc sheets. Whenever the heavy torrential rains of the wet season came pouring down, she had to sit huddled in the driest corner of the room, waiting for hours until the storm passed because the floodwaters would soak her thin mattress. The local Ndi villagers frequently used her as their favorite subject of amiibo gossip, while unwinding over fresh palm wine at the local taverns. The general consensus was that she was a cursed, barren woman who had been utterly abandoned by her extended family, left to rot in absolute poverty until her dying day. Despite the endless rumors and harsh living conditions, Mama Nneka always woke up before dawn. She spent her days diligently gathering crushed bottles, rusty cans, and damp cardboard, hauling them to the local scrap yard just to earn a few miserable naira coins. Her existence appeared entirely hopeless, devoid of any joy or human connection. Yet, every single night, under the dim, flickering glow of a kerosene lantern, she would carefully pull a thick, leather-bound ledger from beneath her damp pillow. With a steady hand that betrayed her frail appearance, she would meticulously record detailed observations in the book, secrets that no one in Onitsha had ever laid eyes upon. Back in the heart of the market, Amaka was the undisputed queen of arrogance and superficiality. She always adorned herself in the most expensive, loudly colored lace and Ankara dresses, draped her neck in massive, heavy costume jewelry, and constantly spoke on her latest smartphone at a screaming volume just so everyone would think she was closing massive international deals. However, this elaborate facade was crumbling rapidly. Amaka was drowning in a terrifying sea of bank debt, her fabric business hemorrhaging money while she desperately tried to maintain her opulent fake life. Terrified of looming bankruptcy and the public humiliation that would follow, Amaka channeled all her crippling anxiety and boiling rage into bullying those weaker than her, specifically, Mama Nneka. The old scavenger had become Amaka's personal punching bag. Whenever Amaka went a whole morning without making a single sale, she would storm out of her shop, viciously kick Mama Nneka's scrap basket across the dirt road, and scream that the old hag was an evil spirit bringing bad luck to her business. This unprovoked, daily cruelty made the surrounding vendors despise Amaka, causing them to secretly distance themselves from her toxic presence. Meanwhile, Chioma continued to expertly play her role as the selfless, charitable maiden of the community. Every evening, she would carefully pack up leftover rice and stew from her kitchen and carry it to Mama Nneka's leaking hut. But her apparent kindness was completely hollow, fueled entirely by an insatiable, dark ambition. 2 years prior, Chioma had worked briefly as a filing assistant at a prestigious law firm in the city. While snooping through classified archives, she stumbled upon the original, undisputed land deed for the massive Onitsha main market, the very ground on which thousands of vendors paid exorbitant rent. The sole proprietor listed on the deed was a woman named Nneka Obi. Blinded by greed, Chioma became absolutely convinced that the miserable, ragged scavenger was the true billionaire owner, suffering from either severe dementia or hiding from past enemies. Chioma's grand master plan was to aggressively play the loving daughter, isolate the old woman from the rest of the world, and eventually trick her into placing her ink thumbprint on an irrevocable deed of transfer. Deep in her dark heart, Chioma was gleefully counting down the days until she could evict everyone, steal the land, and crown herself the wealthiest socialite in all of Nigeria. A massive economic crisis, or wa'ala, suddenly descended upon the bustling market. Representatives from the elusive landlord's legal team arrived unannounced, pasting notices on the concrete walls declaring an immediate, non-negotiable 100% increase in store rent. Amaka, already suffocating under the crushing weight of her unpaid bank loans, completely lost her mind with fury. She had absolutely no idea where she would find the money to keep her doors open. Blinded by panic and rage, Amaka spotted Mama Nneka limping past her stall with a heavy sack of plastics. Without a second thought, Amaka lunged forward, violently grabbing the collar of the old woman's torn blouse. "You cursed witch! It is because of your dirty footsteps around my shop that we are suffering this terrible fate. You are the demon destroying our market." Amaka shrieked, shoving Mama Nneka forcefully to the hard earth. The sack tore open, scattering days' worth of hard-earned scraps into the muddy gutters. The other frantic vendors simply watched, too consumed by their own financial panic to intervene. They silently allowed Amaka to use the old woman as a convenient scapegoat for their collective misery. Mama Nneka slowly picked herself up, dusted off her knees, and looked into the eyes of every single vendor who stood by and did nothing, her sharp memory recording every face. Spotting the perfect opportunity to solidify her savior complex, Chioma rushed into the chaotic scene, forcefully shoving people aside. She aggressively confronted Amaka, screaming, "You wicked beast! Have you completely lost your humanity? Can't you see she is old enough to be your grandmother?" With dramatic flair, Chioma wrapped a protective arm around Mama Nneka and guided her away from the hostile crowd, leading her all the way back to the quiet isolation of the leaky hut. Once inside, Chioma pretended to tenderly wash the scrapes on Mama Nneka's elbows with warm water. However, while the old woman was supposedly resting her eyes, Chioma's gaze frantically darted around the dark, cramped room, desperately trying to locate where the original land documents might be hidden. She casually probed, masking her greed with a sugary sweet voice, "Mama, did you ever own any big properties or valuable things in the past? If you have old papers, I can help you sell them so you never have to eat from the gutters again." Mama Nneka deliberately ignored the question, mumbling incoherently about the weather and staring blankly at the wall like a senile fool. Chioma gritted her teeth in silent, burning frustration, constantly reminding herself to remain patient for the ultimate multi-billion naira payout. A few days later, Amaka's sharp, cynical mind began connecting the dots regarding Chioma's overly perfect behavior. Knowing the vicious, selfish nature of their town, Amaka simply refused to believe that a beautiful, ambitious young woman would voluntarily spend all her free time wiping dirt off a filthy scavenger without a massive hidden motive. Consumed by suspicion, Amaka decided to covertly trail Chioma under the cover of darkness. She tiptoed through the tall grass behind Mama Nneka's isolated hut and pressed her eye against a rusted hole in the corrugated zinc wall. Inside, illuminated by a single flickering candle, she witnessed Chioma frantically tearing through Mama Nneka's meager belongings, lifting the mattress, and rummaging through clay pots while the old woman snored loudly. Amaka's eyes widened in profound shock as the realization hit her like a physical blow. This deceptive little girl is not a saint. She knows for a fact that this wretched old woman is hoarding hidden wealth. Amaka whispered into the night. An intense, poisonous jealousy immediately ignited in Amaka's chest. She resolved that she would never allow a manipulative little snake like Chioma to steal the hidden jackpot all for herself. Amaka vowed to forcefully insert herself into the equation and claim a piece of the pie. The very next morning, the market vendors were completely bewildered by Amaka's sudden, drastic change in behavior. Instead of hurling insults and empty plastic bottles at Mama Nneka, Amaka intercepted the old woman with a wide, artificial smile. She presented Mama Nneka with a basket of expensive, imported apples, speaking in a sickeningly sweet tone, "Oh, Mama, please forgive my terrible temper from the other day. The stress of business clouded my judgment, but from now on, I will take care of you." Chioma, who was standing at a nearby stall buying provisions, witnessed this bizarre exchange and immediately felt a surge of hot panic. She instantly deduced that Amaka had discovered her secret plan and was now attempting to hijack the inheritance. A brutal, silent psychological war officially commenced between the two scheming women. Over the next week, they fiercely competed to buy Mama Nneka the best roasted yams, the softest blankets, and the sweetest drinks, each desperately hoping to win the old woman's exclusive trust and discover the hiding place of the legendary wealth. Mama Nneka simply sat back on a wooden stool, slowly chewing the free fruits, her eyes darting between the two fiercely greedy women as she analyzed their transparent deception. Realizing that Amaka was a serious threat who could ruin her years of careful planning, Chioma decided it was time to play incredibly dirty. During the absolute busiest hour of the afternoon market, when thousands of people were packed shoulder to shoulder, Chioma secretly slipped her own heavy, fake gold bracelet deep into Mama Nneka's scavenger basket. Moments later, Chioma unleashed a blood-curdling scream, collapsing to her knees and wailing that her precious family heirloom had been stolen from her stall. She aggressively pointed a shaking finger directly at Amaka, reminding the massive crowd that Amaka was drowning in bank debt and desperate enough to become a common thief. Furious at the blatant defamation, Amaka lunged at Chioma, tackling her into the dust. The two women engaged in a vicious, tearing brawl right in the center of the market, ripping at each other's wigs and expensive clothes. After they were pulled apart by the market guards, Chioma dramatically marched over to Mama Nneka's basket, rummaged through the garbage, and victoriously pulled out the gold bracelet. She loudly proclaimed to the shocked crowd that Amaka was the thief and had cowardishly hidden the stolen jewelry in the innocent old woman's basket to frame her. The gullible crowd swallowed the lie completely. The fallout from Chioma's devious manipulation was absolute and devastating for Amaka. Branded as a shameless thief who tried to frame a helpless elder, Amaka was subjected to a brutal, community-wide boycott. Not a single customer stepped foot near her fabric store, her neighboring vendors spat on the ground whenever she walked by. Sitting utterly alone in her empty shop, surrounded by unsold merchandise and mounting bills, Amaka broke down and wept bitterly. For the first time in her arrogant life, she intimately felt the crushing, humiliating pain of being unfairly discriminated against and despised by an entire community, the exact same agonizing pain she had inflicted upon Mama Nneka for months. A profound, heavy wave of genuine remorse washed over her soul. Looking across the dusty plaza, Amaka watched Mama Nneka quietly picking up scraps, completely oblivious to the chaos. Amaka finally saw the absolute truth: Chioma was a venomous, ruthless predator hiding beneath a saintly smile. More importantly, Amaka realized that if Chioma was willing to destroy a rival's life over a fake bracelet, Mama Nneka was in grave, life-threatening danger if left entirely in the hands of that psychotic young woman. Feeling triumphant and believing all her obstacles were finally eliminated, Chioma prepared to execute the final, fatal phase of her master plan. She sat at her kitchen table and carefully drafted an airtight legal document transferring all of Nneka Obi's properties and assets directly into her own name. Next, she purchased a thick bottle of sweetened yogurt and crushed 3 powerful sleeping pills into the liquid, shaking it until the drugs completely dissolved. Her sinister plan was incredibly simple: force the old woman to drink the tainted yogurt, wait for her to fall into a comatose sleep, aggressively press her ink thumb onto the transfer deed, and finally register the document at the municipal office before dawn. Dressed impeccably in a flowing white gown to maintain her angelic persona, Chioma practically skipped toward Mama Nneka's isolated hut, clutching a black leather folder. However, she was completely oblivious to the fact that a ruined, desperate Amaka was hiding in the shadows of the alleyways. Knowing Chioma's ruthless nature, Amaka had correctly deduced that the young woman was making her final move. Moving with silent determination, Amaka trailed Chioma through the darkness, absolutely resolved to stop whatever demonic wickedness was about to unfold. Inside the stifling, dimly lit hut, Chioma aggressively pushed the open bottle of tainted yogurt into Mama Nneka's frail hands, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Drink it all, Mama. It is very rich, it will help you sleep soundly through the cold night." Mama Nneka slowly took the cold plastic bottle, but instead of bringing it to her lips, she looked deeply into Chioma's eyes and asked in a surprisingly clear, commanding voice, "My daughter, you have been remarkably good to me. Are you absolutely certain you desire nothing in return from a wretched old beggar?" Chioma's eye twitched slightly, but she forced a sickening smile. "Oh, Mama, heaven is my reward. Please, just drink." At that exact moment, Amaka, who was crouching in the muddy bushes just outside the window, picked up a massive, heavy stone and hurled it violently onto the rusty zinc roof. Bang! The deafening explosion of sound echoed through the night like a gunshot. Chioma screamed in pure terror, violently jumping backward. The sudden shock caused her to violently knock the bottle out of Mama Nneka's hands, sending the drugged yogurt shattering and spilling uselessly into the dirt floor. The thumbprint plan was completely ruined. Furious and trembling with rage, Chioma stormed out into the night, while Mama Nneka simply stared at the white puddle on the floor, fully aware of exactly what had just transpired. The following morning, absolute pandemonium erupted in the Onitsha main market. A massive, official banner was erected at the front gates, boldly declaring that the true, undisputed owner of the land would arrive in person tomorrow to officially decide whether to renew the vendor leases or completely demolish the market to build a luxury mall. The market plunged into extreme panic mode. Thousands of vendors, including Amaka, were terrified of losing their sole source of livelihood. For Chioma, the announcement triggered a desperate, frenzied mania. Her timeline was destroyed. She absolutely had to secure Mama Nneka's signature before the sun rose tomorrow, or the mysterious landlord would expose her fraud. Abandoning all pretense of kindness, Chioma sprinted through the town and burst violently into Mama Nneka's hut. She slammed the legal documents and a dark blue ink pad onto the small wooden table. Grabbing the old woman's wrists with vicious, bruising force, Chioma snarled like a wild animal. "Listen to me, you useless old hag. You are going to press your thumb on this paper right now, or I swear to God I will bury you in this filthy shack." But to Chioma's shock, Mama Nneka did not cower. She resisted with a sudden, astonishing physical strength that defied her frail appearance. As Chioma violently wrestled with the old woman, trying to force her thumb into the ink pad, the wooden door of the hut was kicked wide open. Amaka stormed into the room like a hurricane. Without a single word of hesitation, Amaka launched a brutal flying kick directly into Chioma's waist, sending the younger woman crashing hard against the clay wall. "You filthy, venomous snake. I knew your angelic face was hiding a demon." Amaka roared, standing protectively in front of Mama Nneka. Chioma scrambled to her feet, spitting blood from her split lip, her eyes burning with manic desperation. "You absolute fool, Amaka. Why are you fighting me? Help me hold her down. If you help me get this signature, we can split billions. This rotting old woman doesn't deserve this wealth." Chioma screamed, waving the deed frantically. Amaka stood her ground, shaking her head with profound disgust. "I may have been a cruel, arrogant bully in the past, Chioma, but I am not a murderer, and I am certainly not a cheap thief, or she, like you." While the two women engaged in a blistering screaming match, Mama Nneka remained seated on her bed. A very faint, knowing smile crept across the corners of the old woman's mouth. Her grand sociological experiment was finally reaching its perfect conclusion. The morning of the landlord's arrival, the normally deafening Onitsha main market was wrapped in an eerie, terrified silence. Thousands of vendors stood nervously by their packed stalls, holding their breath as a convoy of 3 gleaming, bulletproof black G-wagons rolled majestically into the central plaza. The heavy doors swung open, and out stepped a deeply intimidating, wealthy Odegu, a powerful high-profile lawyer dressed in flawless traditional Igbo attire, draped in heavy, authentic coral beads that signaled extreme wealth and authority. The entire market, thinking this powerful man was the ruthless billionaire landlord coming to destroy their livelihoods, immediately dropped to their knees in absolute submission. Chioma, determined to salvage her crumbling dreams of wealth, aggressively elbowed her way to the very front of the kneeling crowd. She smoothed out her elegant dress, slapped on her most seductive, charming smile, and prepared to passionately advocate for herself, hoping to manipulate the billionaire into a private partnership or perhaps even marriage. She was ready to sell out every single person in the market to secure her own luxurious future. However, the imposing Odegu completely ignored the groveling merchants and the aggressively smiling Chioma. His sharp eyes scanned the massive crowd until they finally landed on a small figure standing near the gutters. It was Mama Nneka, still wearing her ragged clothes and holding her filthy scavenger basket, with a highly anxious Amaka standing defensively by her side. To the utter shock and disbelief of every single person present, the powerful, wealthy lawyer broke into a frantic run. He rushed past the wealthy merchants, marched straight into the mud, and threw himself down on both knees right at Mama Nneka's torn sandals. He bowed his head so low it nearly touched the earth and spoke in a booming, deeply respectful voice that echoed across the silent market. "Oga Madam, Chief Nneka. I have drafted all the eviction notices perfectly according to your strict instructions. Does Your Excellency wish for my security team to forcefully shut down and barricade your market today, or shall we proceed with the individual expulsions?" The silence that followed was so profoundly absolute that one could hear a pin drop. The thousands of kneeling vendors froze like statues, completely unable to process the impossible reality unfolding before their eyes. Chioma's jaw dropped open as she choked on her own breath, completely paralyzed by the catastrophic revelation. Amaka began trembling so violently she nearly collapsed into the dirt. Moving with a slow, deliberate grace that commanded absolute awe, Mama Nneka let her filthy plastic scavenger basket fall to the ground. She reached up and untied the ragged, dirty headscarf she had worn for a year, letting it drop to reveal impeccably neat, braided silver hair. She straightened her spine, seemingly growing taller and more imposing with every passing second. The cloudy, submissive look in her eyes completely evaporated, replaced by the fierce, terrifying gaze of an apex predator. Looking down at the kneeling lawyer, she spoke, but her voice was no longer the weak, shaking whisper of a beggar. It was the booming, commanding baritone of a titan of industry. "Stand up, barrister. It is high time we finally swept the absolute garbage out of my property." She was not a discarded beggar, she was Chief Nneka Obi, the legendary, reclusive billionaire matriarch who held the absolute monopoly on the city's commercial real estate, shipping lines, and the very ground beneath their feet. The shockwave of the revelation triggered a wave of absolute hysteria among the crowd, but Chioma's survival instincts kicked into overdrive. Refusing to accept defeat, she sprinted forward, falling to her knees and desperately grabbing Chief Nneka's ankles. "Mama. It is a miracle. It is me, Chioma, your most loyal, loving daughter. I am the only one who fed you and cared for you when these wicked people abused you," she cried hysterically, forcing fake tears to stream down her beautiful face. Chief Nneka's eyes narrowed into slits of pure ice. With a sudden, explosive violence, she yanked her leg free and delivered a devastating, echoing slap entirely across Chioma's face. Smack. "Do not dare touch my skin, you venomous, bloodthirsty parasite." Nneka roared, her voice vibrating with authority. "Did you genuinely believe I was so senile that I didn't smell the sleeping pills you crushed into my yogurt? Did you think I was blind when you tore my heart apart searching for my property deeds while I pretended to snore?" The brutal public exposure hit Chioma like a freight train, sending her tumbling backward into the dust, her face completely drained of color as the crowd gasped in horror at her exposed evil. Pacing back and forth like a majestic lioness, Chief Nneka addressed the thousands of terrified vendors, exposing the entire truth behind her elaborate disguise. She explained that after her wealthy husband passed away, she was entirely surrounded by greedy, sycophantic relatives and fake friends who only worshipped her bank accounts. Exhausted and disgusted by the superficiality of her high society life, she orchestrated a massive social experiment. She disguised herself as the lowest, most despised creature in society, a scavenger, to personally inspect her market and discover the true, unfiltered character of the people occupying her land. For over 12 grueling months, I suffered in the rain and dirt to witness the naked truth of your souls, Nneka announced, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. Some of you are hopelessly consumed by greed, while the rest of you are just cowardly, cruel bullies who eagerly step on the necks of the weak to make yourselves feel powerful. As she spoke, she methodically pointed her finger at specific vendors, the ones who had spit on her, the ones who had overcharged her, and the ones who had laughed at her misery. Realizing that her elaborate dreams of mansions and private jets were completely obliterated, Chioma's mind finally shattered into a million irrecoverable pieces. The angelic facade violently peeled away, revealing a deeply psychotic, rabid desperation. She scrambled to her feet, her hair wild and her eyes bulging, screaming vile curses at the top of her lungs. You wretched, decaying old corpse. This empire doesn't belong to you. You have one foot in the grave. I am young, I am beautiful, and I deserve this wealth to change my destiny. You should have just died. Driven completely insane by greed, Chioma reached deep into her leather handbag and withdrew a wickedly sharp, rusted folding knife. Emitting a blood-curdling screech, she lunged aggressively toward Chief Nneka, her twisted logic convincing her that if she simply murdered the old woman in cold blood, she could somehow still force the thumbprint onto the forged documents hidden in her purse. The massive crowd screamed in collective terror, scattering blindly, but the lawyer and bodyguards were caught entirely off guard by the sudden, explosive violence. In that terrifying fraction of a second, as the rusted blade plunged toward Chief Nneka's chest, Amaka moved entirely on pure, selfless instinct. Without a single thought for her own life or her crushing debts, Amaka threw her body violently across the trajectory of the blade, acting as a human shield for the billionaire. The sharp knife violently slashed across Amaka's upper arm, tearing through her expensive lace fabric and spilling bright red blood onto the dusty earth. As Amaka cried out in pain, the heavily armed bodyguards finally recovered from their shock. They tackled Chioma brutally to the ground, disarming her and pressing her face deep into the dirt. Clutching her heavily bleeding arm, Amaka collapsed to her knees before Chief Nneka. Tears of genuine shame and physical pain streamed down her face as she sobbed, "My madam, I am so deeply sorry for the disgusting, wicked things I did to you when you were in rags. I know I am a terrible person who deserves to be ruined, but please, do not let this evil girl take your life." Chief Nneka stared down at the bleeding woman, completely astonished by the incredible sacrifice and the undeniable proof of Amaka's profound moral redemption. The atmosphere in the market was thick with a terrifying, palpable tension. Chief Nneka signaled her security team, ordering them to drag the screaming, thrashing Chioma to the massive concrete pillar in the absolute center of the plaza and tie her firmly to it, forcing the entire community to witness her absolute disgrace. You thought your childish, amateur deception could outsmart a woman who built a shipping empire through blood and sweat. Nneka sneered at the bound girl. Turning her back on Chioma, Nneka motioned for her lawyer to hand her the thick stack of lease agreements. Like a merciless judge delivering execution orders, she began calling out names. Every single merchant who had ever thrown dirty water on her, every vendor who had kicked her basket, and every bystander who had laughed at her pain was publicly identified. She did not use physical violence, instead, she unleashed the devastating, unstoppable force of economic ruin. She ordered their immediate eviction, stripping them of their shops, their inventory access, and their livelihoods, banishing them from the commercial center of the city forever without a single penny of compensation. Total pandemonium erupted as dozens of wealthy vendors were violently stripped of their status in mere seconds. Grown men and women fell flat on their bellies in the dirt, weeping uncontrollably and grabbing at Nneka's ankles, screaming, "I beg Mama, forgive us. It was the devil's work. We didn't know who you were." But Chief Nneka remained completely immovable, her heart hardened by a year of enduring their pointless cruelty. "Mercy? When I was starving and dressed in rags, begging for scraps in the gutters, which one of you showed me even a drop of mercy?" she bellowed, kicking their hands away. Poverty is the ultimate mirror, it perfectly reflects the true, rotting nature of a human soul. You do not respect humanity, you only bow to money. Today, you will pay the ultimate price for your vile arrogance. Heavily armed police officers, summoned earlier by the legal team, stormed into the market and began forcefully dragging the blacklisted vendors away from their stalls. The chaotic sounds of shattering glass, wailing merchants, and tearing fabrics echoed loudly into the afternoon sky as the Great Purge commenced. Tied securely to the concrete pillar, Chioma continued to thrash wildly like a rabid dog, completely refusing to accept her devastating reality. She screamed uncontrollably that she was destined to be a billionaire, threatening to destroy everyone. Chief Nneka walked calmly over to the deranged girl and dramatically tossed the forged, fake property deeds directly into the mud at Chioma's feet. "Officers, unbind this pathetic thief and lock her in the deepest cell you have," Nneka commanded coldly. Between the undeniable charges of major real estate fraud, forgery, and attempted premeditated murder in broad daylight, she will have decades in a freezing prison cell to dream about being a billionaire. As the police roughly handcuffed Chioma and dragged her aggressively toward the armored vans, the very same market women who had previously worshipped her as a village angel completely turned on her. Furious at her sociopathic deception, they grabbed rotting tomatoes and spoiled yams from the gutters and hurled them violently at Chioma's head, covering her beautiful face in putrid garbage as she was hauled away in absolute, historic humiliation. Amidst the deafening chaos of the evictions, Amaka was quietly sitting in the corner of her shop, wrapping a tight bandage around her bleeding arm. She was hurriedly packing her remaining fabrics into cheap Gonamasco bags, fully preparing to abandon the city forever. Because she had been so remarkably cruel to Mama Nneka at the very beginning of the disguise, Amaka held absolutely no illusions of being spared from the billionaire's wrath. She wept softly, deeply regretting the arrogant, fake life that had brought her to this miserable end. Suddenly, a massive shadow fell over her doorway. Two heavily armed bodyguards blocked her exit. Chief Nneka stepped slowly into the cramped shop, staring down at the terrified woman. "Where exactly do you think you are running to, Amaka?" Nneka asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Have you suddenly forgotten that you owe the commercial banks millions of naira that you cannot possibly repay?" Amaka immediately collapsed to her knees, sobbing violently. "I know my punishment is fully deserved, my madam. I am packing to return to my village in shame. I will leave everything behind." To Amaka's absolute astonishment, Chief Nneka let out a soft, genuine chuckle and reached down, firmly grabbing Amaka's uninjured arm to pull her up from the dirt. "You are undoubtedly a loudmouth, highly arrogant, and hopelessly infected with the disease of a fake life," Nneka said, her stern face finally softening into a look of profound respect. "However, when the ultimate test of character arrived, when it was a matter of life and death, you proved that underneath your terrible attitude beats the heart of a true, courageous human being. You threw your life away to take a knife for a beggar." Reaching into her expensive leather handbag, Chief Nneka pulled out a heavy set of golden keys and pressed them firmly into Amaka's trembling palms. "These are the master keys to the newly renovated, largest wholesale plaza at the very front of the market. Starting this exact second, you are the chief managing director of my entire Onitsha operations. My lawyers will clear all your pathetic bank debts by noon. But mark my words carefully, Amaka, never let arrogance poison your soul again." Amaka collapsed against Nneka's chest, crying tears of overwhelming gratitude, having learned the greatest, most painful lesson of her entire life. Exactly 1 month later, the Onitsha main market had been completely transformed into a beacon of prosperity and intense discipline. Under Amaka's extremely strict but deeply fair management, the market was cleaner and more profitable than ever before. Amaka had permanently abandoned her toxic, fake lifestyle. She now wore simple, modest cotton dresses and completely stopped buying flashy, counterfeit jewelry. Most importantly, she dedicated a large portion of her massive new salary to feeding the homeless and paying school fees for the poorest children in the district, ensuring she never forgot the terrifying lessons she learned when she was at rock bottom. She was universally respected by every vendor. Meanwhile, the horrifying story of Chioma the angel had rapidly morphed into a legendary, chilling cautionary tale passed down by mothers to their daughters around the cooking fires, a stark, terrifying warning about the absolute destruction that inevitably follows a life built on greed, deception, and the burning desire to steal what you did not earn. Desire to steal what you did not earn. Seen 29 miles away from the bustling market, deep inside the cold, suffocating darkness of the state penitentiary, Chioma sat completely alone on a damp concrete floor. Her once flawlessly beautiful face was now hollowed out, her elegant clothes replaced by a filthy, oversized prison uniform. She stared blankly at the peeling paint on the wall, endlessly whispering to herself, "I am the landlord. I am a billionaire. The land is mine." The sheer magnitude of her greed and the poisonous, festering jealousy had completely eaten away her sanity. Her stunning physical beauty, which had successfully fooled an entire city, could not hide the deep, rotting corruption of her soul forever. She had spent years meticulously digging a deep, deadly pit to bury an innocent old woman, only to dive headfirst into it herself. The brutal Igbo proverb had come to life, "Who do anyhow, see anyhow." The consequences of her demonic ambition had finally caught up to her, locking her in a cage of her own making for the rest of her miserable life. Far removed from the noise of the city, at the highest balcony of a sprawling, breathtaking billionaire estate, Chief Nneka Obi sat comfortably in a hand-woven rattan chair. She was dressed in flawlessly tailored, pure white silk, a gentle evening breeze lightly rustling her silver hair. She took a slow, deeply satisfying sip of fresh, chilled palm wine from a crystal glass, looking out over the sprawling, glowing city of Onitsha that she entirely controlled. Her perilous journey in rags had been physically agonizing, but it had cleansed her empire of toxic rot and brought her absolute peace. As the vibrant, rhythmic sounds of distant African drums floated through the evening air, Nneka smiled, leaving a profound, timeless piece of wisdom for the Igbo people and the world. Never judge the absolute value of a book by its torn, dirty cover. And never, ever trample aggressively on the people who have fallen down, because you have absolutely no idea if tomorrow, they will be the masters who hold your destiny in their hands. If you enjoyed this powerful story about humility and karma, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next inspiring drama. Drop a comment below with your favorite character.